Welcome to Soul Forum. Each episode invites you to journey across the landscape of our global collective soul. From the moment humankind entered into the story of the universe, we have sought to orient ourselves within this unfolding gift of life. Together, we continue to seek insights and language to navigate our experience of spirituality, ethics, sexuality and gender roles, civic engagement, our role in the ecosphere, and more. Your guide for each of our series are emerging scholars from around the world studying at the Graduate Theological Union in Berkeley, California. The GTU is one of the world's most comprehensive centers for graduate study of religion and theology. It's a leading destination for leaders and innovators from a wide range of spiritual and philosophical perspectives to explore the world's great religions and wisdom traditions. So give yourself a moment to lean in and journey a little deeper into the human experience. Welcome to Soul Forum.
Well, welcome everybody. We're excited to have a conversation today with Porsia Tunzi. She was the one who put together the wonderful series about braving confinement and interviews that went along with that. And hopefully you got a chance to listen to all of those interviews these past 4 weeks. Today we get to talk to the one who put the whole series together. Porsia obviously is a student at the GTU. Maybe she'll tell you a little bit about that before we get started today. But we're delighted to have Porsia with us this morning. So welcome, Porsia.
Thank you. Thanks so much for having me.
Yeah. Maybe let's start with just a little bit about what was the kind of the idea behind the whole series. You know, as each of the interviews unfolded, I realized that you were diving deeper and deeper and deeper into your content based on the life experience of each person you interviewed. So it hit me that you had probably some strategy for the combination of bringing together the situation about confinement that we're all facing with COVID and these theories about social location and intersectionality and some of the other theoretical language that you brought up. Can you talk a little bit about, what was your kind of the arc of your project that you were trying to explore?
Yeah, absolutely. The idea started was inspired from a course I taught at California Lutheran University in the fall. I knew I was going to teach it in summer. That's when I was told. And the course is titled Religion, Identity, and Vocation. And so then I spent the next few months with students, undergrads, first years, and we were exploring all of these ideas, these concepts of social location in terms of identity, intersectionality, really tying together reflection and action through the concept of praxis and really introducing them to these terms. And part of that class, I did this guest speaker Zoom series where I had 3 different people come in and just talk about those topics. And I was thinking, this really could be a podcast series where I get a little bit more focus and give a little bit more attention to like a specific population of people. And so because I myself am a woman who is about to turn 31, I am interested in my peers, other female identified people, and seeing how they explore those topics. So I was very much in that work, in those ideas already, because I was teaching this course, and I was really seeing how students loved the guest speakers. Like they wanted more. They wanted to learn from different people that were, different from them too. And I think they were hungry for connection in this time where they're all in their little homes, not being able to live on campus. And so I think for me, it really came from an idea of what could I maybe use with my students or in my classroom, future classrooms, or what could maybe other professors or teachers, what could be helpful for them? How can we apply theory and action? And so that's really where the idea came from. And then the arc of the project, it just, kind of developed more and more, when I pitched the idea to you and you guys accepted it, then it was thinking through who can really kind of give a voice to these ideas. And then it was hard because I had probably a list of 10, but then thinking through who is accessible right now, who has like the technology or the ability to come meet me and have an interview. So maybe some of the people that I thought would be a part of this project maybe couldn't be because of just this time of confinement and pandemic. But I think the 4 people that I did end up interviewing really got to speak to a lot of the ideas that I wanted to voice. And then, of course, kind of going beyond what I maybe even hoped that this project would be.
Yeah, that was one of my questions. Where in the interview process, as you journeyed through and deeper into the conversation with each of them, were there any sort of surprise moments or moments where you thought it kind of opened up new ways for you to think about both social location, intersectionality, the issues of confinement that were, I don't know, that you didn't, it's hard to predict what is going to happen in a conversation, but that brought you some clarity or some more focus about how those play together?
Yeah. So I think what was surprising, well, so I'll first say that I know these women all in different capacities. So either they might be colleagues of mine or people I've met through other people, friends, friends of friends, things like that. And I think what really comes to mind is just this their ability to go so deep and be so vulnerable. When I didn't necessarily think that was going to happen. Like I thought, oh, we would touch on some things, but people, I think of Erin really comes to mind, of just her willingness to talk about some really hard things she's been going through during this time of confinement, going through a divorce, her diagnosis of ADHD later in life and navigating that and just being so willing and so forward with that experience and really allowing, and all of the women, I think, allowing their stories to just be shared and given so freely was something that just really stood out to me. And I think that in and of itself gives life to theoretical concepts that sometimes can just be on paper and not really feel alive. But then you have these people who are living deeply and intentionally and navigating really difficult things, whether that is their identity itself or maybe some privilege that comes with their identity. But then, I think you really start connecting the dots in a way that I didn't necessarily anticipate. Like I almost thought I was going to have to force some connections, right?
I wondered
was
about
like,
that.
oh, how is this going to really play out or come together? And it so naturally came together because of just the authenticity that they displayed and their willingness to really reflect on topics that are hard to do. I think of Lydia speaking to losing her father and then the resiliency of that. Afterwards she's talked about, like, this is not something I talk about with anyone really, but there was almost this willingness of like, wow, I have this platform now that I can actually share, and maybe it sparks something else with other people. And so it really, I think I had a small idea of like what this could be or how it would turn out. And then it really, if anything, the other people in my life that have listened to the podcast, they're eager for more, or they've talked about like, oh, I've actually, I went home to my partner, or I had a conversation similar to this afterward with a friend. And that's where it's like, wow, this has traction. Like this kind of podcast or theme can really, it's an invitation, and that's something I didn't necessarily anticipate. And that's really exciting.
Yeah, I like both of those. One, this kind of capacity for vulnerability that you discovered along the way. And I do have a question about that. And then you're right, it did provoke because after I got done listening, I would start reflecting on my own, like, yeah, what is my social location, right? It invites you to think about who the heck am I in this big complex world in which I live. One of the questions I would have for you is, I wonder if the capacity for vulnerability was derived from the way in which you are required to explore social location, right? So you invited people to see not just, like one aspect of how they present in the world, but we're all this multi-layered, multifaceted amalgamation of layers that all intersect with each other and then intersect with the contexts in which we're in. And maybe that, just finding yourself invited onto that landscape because you're human, you can only approach it with a vulnerable edge, right? Maybe that's what it was. I was trying to figure that out myself.
Yeah, perhaps it's just inevitable, right? That you would go there. I think you're absolutely right. I think there's just something of the nature of exploring identity in such a complex way. Yeah. I think I've also been reflecting on this of how social location, and knowing that there's so many different aspects of your social location or categories, even those categories, as much as we want to just have them in these clean, perfect boxes, that's an illusion, right? Like, even when I say I am Catholic or I grew up Catholic and I have a Catholic identity, that might mean something incredibly different to someone else, even in the same area as me, that identifies as Catholic. Yeah. Right. So these categories in and of itself also, I think, invite a deeper reflection because, again, or even, how I perceive my whiteness or how I perceive my identity as a woman and womanhood. Yeah. I might explore that or think of that in really different terms than someone else. And I think that's what I loved about interviewing Naomi and Aaron, because they both had this similar identity marker of being Jewish, right? Or having this Jewish legacy, but they totally went about it very differently. Yeah. And I think that was I didn't necessarily know that's how that was going to play out. Right. And so I thought it was so great to be able to be in these conversations and realize, wow, I might have an assumption of what Jewish means, right, for a person. Yeah. And yet here are two different people that have this identity marker that explore it or live it out so differently. And I think it widens our understanding of identity, of social location. Yeah, I think it widens it both for when you do self-analysis about that, like you were just talking about, and then also you kind of birth your way into the realization that those markers are no way to identify the other, right? You can't just look at somebody and go, oh, she's Catholic, or they're Republican, or they're this, that, or the other thing. You start to realize, oh God, it's way more messy. And that's what I want to talk to you about next. It's way more messy than I anticipated. And that is a term you were like milking like a fat cow. I mean, you would say, these categories are very messy. Can you talk about, Porsia, what is the mess that you think you were trying to expose in all this? Because I think you hinted at it, and I couldn't quite tell where you were going with that, because you were trying to get each person to think about the messiness, but naturally people try to get clarity, right? So they didn't always end up in that messy landscape. What were you thinking with that? Yeah, I appreciate you asking for, what does that mean? I think first, when I think of the word messy, it oftentimes is thought of in a bad or negative light, right? Like when you think of your house being messy or something like that, like it's kind of, you avoid the mess. And I guess what I was trying to do, or why that word kept kind of coming into my mind is for me, messy feels personal. It feels visceral. It feels real. And when I invite someone into my home, even if it's messy, that means I really trust that person. And
that's fascinating.
I'm bare, I'm exposed. And I felt like these conversations were exposure of, there was kind of this like nakedness, if you will, of these different people. And only, I mean, they were only 45 minutes around, that time frame. So just imagine if you spent even longer exploring those topics. It's messy in terms of I think all of us can have maybe an image when we hear that word messy of things are out of sorts or things are not lined up. And it's constantly trying to make sense of that. And sometimes we can't make sense of it. And we have to kind of dwell in that quote unquote messy place. Yeah. And again, I think of during this time of confinement or COVID, where like we can't fully make sense of what we are facing or how to navigate life with family or with family that we can't see. Like it feels unhinged, like it feels messy. And so I think I just kept going back to that because all of these things that I was exploring with these different women, it felt like it was going to be impossible to actually really know them or really unravel or really speak to all of what social location can be.
Right.
Like it's like it is messy or it's complex. Complex feels more academic to me.
I was gonna say that's more cerebral than messy.
Yeah, cerebral.
I like I get with that. Like when my house is messy, I feel vulnerable.
Yeah.
The bathroom's not clean,
Right. And it's embodied, right? Yeah. Like I feel like, and maybe this is because I've spent a lot of my own research in feminist theory and pedagogy, where it really, the emphasis is like, remember you're an embodied person, right? Like that. And like sometimes in the academy, we've lost sense of that. And I think I was really trying to be intentional of like, these are real ideas that can be on the ground. Yeah. And I think speaking the language of everyday people, how would I talk to my mom or my dad? I would talk about how like, oh gosh, life's messy right now.
Yeah.
And we can collectively understand what that means. Yeah. So I think that's maybe what I was going for.
No, I like that. That helps me. And it also is, like you said too, it's sort of an invitation not to be so anxious that identifying your social markers, so to speak, if you realize that it's sort of a messy process, like with Black Lives Matter, those of us who are white and privileged, we know we're going to make just 1,000 mistakes as we start to wade into our own accountability and the language and to just know, oh, this is going to be a mess. Yeah. And so it kind of helps you be more honest and vulnerable to the process.
Absolutely.
That makes perfect sense. The other thing that came up for me was when we talked about social markers, I wondered how much you thought that the experience of COVID itself that has required an entire planet, right, to go into isolation mode. Every human on the planet has had to deal with this.
Right.
How much do you think that is now standing as a social marker for this generation that will, you think about the death toll, we went over 500,000 or something, over 500,000 people passed away from this thing in the United States alone. Has the idea of confinement and this virus that we've dealt with, this pandemic, there's the word I'm looking for, has it become in and of itself some kind of a social marker now for people? Because when you were in these conversations with these people, there's some serious conversation about how they navigated this, right? This seems like it's going to have an effect that feels a little bit like the one person you interviewed talked about historic trauma, right? It's going to live in your body because you missed out on some stuff, whether it be classroom experiences, personal experiences, burying people you love, having a wedding, maybe your job. I mean, there's so much here is it now part of our collective identity going forward? And if so, what are your thoughts about that?
I think it absolutely is. I think it's a historic moment that will live in not only in our collective unconscious and conscious, just as time goes on, but it'll live in our bodies. It's already living in our bodies. And when you study like people who've experienced trauma, years can pass, right? And they still kind of have sometimes like these, they'll have reactions, sometimes even physical reactions or triggers to things that they don't even necessarily realize. But if they were maybe step into like a therapy situation, they would kind of recall like that is because I experienced a traumatic event. And I think confinement, and I can't speak for everyone, but I think from the people that I speak to or I am in community with, in a lot of ways, this has been like a trauma, and for many different reasons, right? But I think of my own life where in the matter of 6 months, I lost 5 different people, and not all to COVID. Some were complications of COVID, but I think the amount of grief that was kind of compiled in, and then figuring out how to process that grief in this time, like I will always, years from now, again, speaking for my own experience, I will always kind of look at this period of like, how did what did grief look like? How did I process that? Who was with me? How did I find connection? I think of Lydia in her interview talks a lot about resiliency and how this generation, and she's really talking about the college students she works with, she believes will adopt this sense of resiliency because they've had to face kind of these wild, unprecedented experiences, whether it's taking care of family members while they're also trying to do classes over Zoom, maybe having to work, maybe they're a frontline worker and they can't just, or their parents are, or family members are. And, never have we all had to kind of navigate that all at once together. And so I think ultimately, at least in some ways, this is kind of my hope that it transforms how we do education. And that might be pie in the sky, Portia idealism speaking. But I can say with how I taught my fall class, I did one-on-one interviews before the class even started. And I taught all first years. So they were literally entering into college, not meeting a single person. Wow. Right. And so I did these one-on-one, interviews, really conversations. I wanted to just know them as human beings. I filmed a video of me introducing myself. I was much more real with them instead of, I didn't try to come off of like, oh yes, I am the superior authority figure that knows everything, and I am just kind of giving you all this information. Right. Like those days are dead. I think they've been dead for a while, but I feel like this moment shifts how we think of community, how we think of connection, prioritizing what matters. Like, was I worried about students turning things in on time? Not really, right? Like I might have said in my syllabus that I don't accept late work. I accepted every late work that came my way, right? Because I recognized that people were experiencing, mental health crises, like so many different levels of pain and grief. And I think there was just this sense of, we have to let go of control. And again, I can speak just as an educator in the classroom. I think this time will impact how we see education in the future, hopefully in good ways. There's always the chance that things can maybe not go in a good way, but I'm hopeful that collectively, from like professors or teacher perspectives, as well as students' perspectives, like we will no longer tolerate like disconnection or just again, like things that really matter. I had a student pass away actually in my class. And so I remember the class afterward thinking, okay, am I going to try and double down on the work that I would quote unquote supposed to get done? Or am I actually going to just provide a virtual space to process loss? And that's what I did. Yeah. I logged on and I said, like, I can't make sense of it. I can only imagine you guys not being able to make sense of this. Yeah. And so how do we just sit here together and acknowledge that there is pain and grief in this space? And again, so it's that invitation to vulnerability that I don't know if I would have done in the past. Maybe I would have, but I think like this moment is an invitation to just allow there to be vulnerability and human decency. And I think a reminder that we're not machines, we're humans. And so I think this is absolutely a social marker. So going back to the original question, I think it'll absolutely impact how we do a lot of different things, how we interact with people, how our structures, our social structures are fostered and taken care of as time goes on. And I am curious, like what does life look like, years from now? But I think what we do now is intentionally connect and create community so that we can create maybe perhaps a new infrastructure or a new way of doing things that then become the norm, so that if there is some big event again in the future, whether that is a pandemic or something else, we'll know how to connect with each other. We'll know how to be there.
Yeah, that's very thoughtful. I love that. I guess the last question I have for you is kind of selfish at some level, and that is, listening to these interviews with these people felt to me, I know you used the term vulnerable, but in my line of work as sort of a spiritual guide in community life, they felt like they were always on the thin edge of the sacred conversations, right? They were so intimate and so like awareness building. They played around with, where does my sense of agency come from? Resiliency. They were so personal. And then also there was such diversity, not only between the speakers, but in every story itself, right? It's like, holy mackerel. And I think one of the light bulbs that went off for me along the way was, I've always, as a kind of a classic clergy person, assumed that to live a meaningful life, right, it helps to tether oneself to some kind of like a religious paradigm or a sense of something outside of myself that maybe is greater than me, that sort of thing. But as I listened to you help these people get into a deep conversation about the complexity of their own, if you will, sacred personal journey, I realized that maybe the pursuit of that which is most holy or most sacred really starts at there, right? There's no normative way to construct a religious perspective or a spiritual path. It has to link to the complexities of your life story. And every life story now we're waking up to realize is just so different and so rich that it's got to be, like you said, almost like a communion of story sharing that allows all of us to find our way into that which is most valuable to us or most sacred to us. And to me, it felt like what you were talking for education has implications for what does church mean, right? When people get together,
absolutely.
Am I supposed to stand up in a pulpit and shove across the loudspeaker, dogma or the way religion has been interpreted for X amount of years, or my own perspective, or should it be more conversational and invitational and messy, so that people feel like they can arrive at some kind of real place of what matters most, or feels like it helps them thrive most fully? I don't know, but I have just begun to think about what your little series might provide as far as implications for the religious life. have you any, I mean, you're a religious person too. So do you have any thoughts of how these discussions might manifest themselves in a way in which religion might be helpful for people down the road?
Yeah, I love that. I love that reflection on these conversations. I mean, I would love that the title of this whole entire podcast is Soul Forum. I think these are soul conversations. Yeah. I am a spiritual person. You know, Catholicism is kind of like my home belief system, but that has really evolved and really has come to include so many different types of awareness, spiritual awareness, or even just as I, you know, study and explore or engage with people that come from different religious or spiritual traditions, my like heightened sense of sacredness that you were speaking to is really something that I'm really in tune with. And I absolutely agree with you in the sense that every conversation I was having felt this level of depth and sacredness, right? Like if my concept of God is simply connection, like when I connect a person in such an intimate way, that is divine, right? Like if that's my understanding of God, then like every conversation then is kind of this radical gift and communion, if you will, or sense of solidarity. I think, or I hope that conversations like these are the future for how we do church or how we do synagogue or whatever it is. I mean, I can only speak from like a Christian context, but I think the more we can sit with people, and this also speaks to like the research I'm also interested in. I'm interested in conversations that happen on the ground among families, among people who kind of live quote unquote normal lives, day-to-day lives, but are still navigating privilege, whiteness, or Black Lives Matter, or hunger, poverty, whatever the issues are. Like people are experiencing and dealing with them all the time, and people from religious backgrounds. And so, you know, I think, you know, I always think of like my family, like what are the kinds of conversations I want my family to have, or what are the conversations I have with my dad on the phone? And, you know, my dad works at a Catholic church in Southern California. And I always think about like, what does he need, or what can give like him or his community life? And I think a lot about how if there was kind of this willingness to be vulnerable from the top, so from pastors, from leaderships, or the leaders of a community, whether they're lay people or clergy, but there has to be this willingness to, I think, be real with the current moment, whatever the current moment is.
Yeah.
You know, when I hear my dad talk about things that have been hard for him, of, you know, working at the church, and, you know, I think about like, is he getting the support, or is he getting the kindness, the compassion that I think he deserves? And of course, I think he deserves it because he's my father. But I think in general, right?
Yeah.
Like, are the lay people of a community, the people that are out there, like maybe on the front lines of dealing with COVID-19, are they receiving or in relationship with their community in like an authentic, real, vulnerable way, instead of like this separate, like, oh, I must still pray to God this certain way. And it just, I think it deadens faith and spirituality if we keep thinking we have to kind of adopt old ways of doing religion. I think there's this call or this invitation to start from the ground, start from our bodies, start from kind of the realness of life, and seeing how actually like the divine is very much alive in the realness. And I really, what comes to mind right now is the film Chocolat, or Chocolate. It has Johnny Depp in it, and it's a great movie, and it's all about Lent. And there's this young priest who gives this homily on Easter Sunday. Right. And he basically says, I don't want to focus on God or Jesus's divinity right now. I actually want to focus on Jesus's humanity. And I think for some people that can feel almost like blasphemous.
Right.
And he wasn't saying forget about the divinity, but I think he was just saying, let us dwell in the humanness of this person that we adore and is our guide and speaks truth. And because then there's this deeper connection that we feel when we remember that Jesus is human or was human. And so, I think it's an invitation for things to be different. And I think if they don't change, you will have less young people be a part of the communities. That's my hunch.
Yeah. I would say you'd have less people who are, whether they're young or wherever, who are sort of use this time to sort of wake up a little bit at some level, because they'll realize, oh man, that's not working for me anymore.
Right.
I love that you framed it that way. I've been wrestling with that myself, being a religious leader who's obviously on his way out as I get older, but I definitely think there's got to be some sort of rebirth of the way in which we imagine, we have all these communities floating around the world, right? Synagogues and chapels and churches and mosques and all these places for these kind of conversations to happen. I can only hope that it does manifest like that. So
yeah, and I think we would see less division if people were allowed to have these conversations in a safe environment, in a nourishing environment, right? Like that's where we see like extremism grows, where people aren't allowed to, I think, authentically deal with real aspects of their life. And when they can do it in a quote unquote safe space, or perhaps a brave space, where people are kind of braving to be themselves, knowing that it's unknown how it all play out. But if people can kind of carry people and walk with people and accompany people, Pope Francis talks a lot about accompaniment. I think that's where we'll see more togetherness, more understanding, compassion, all of the good stuff.
Yeah. Oh, that is awesome. Well, Portia, I knew this conversation would be one that it makes me want to reach through the screen and give you a big hug, but
thank you.
Just because
Likewise.
I've enjoyed so many conversations with you, and I was so happy that you were part of this podcast series, obviously. And I sort of was giddy knowing I was going to get time with you, just the two of us. It's a real treat to be able to just have a conversation with you. So thanks for the wisdom that you brought, not only to the whole series, all the episodes were fantastic. The people you talked with were wonderful. But I knew deep down that you too had a lot to share, and I didn't want to miss out on that. So I love that you brought that to us in this conversation.
Yeah, thank you for the opportunity to come together and really think through what the podcast has meant to me, and then hopefully collectively.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Thanks, Portia.
Thanks.
Thank you for being a part of Soul Forum today. We appreciate you taking the time to spend time with us as we all attempt to explore what it means to, again, feel our way into what the experience of soul is like for us today. Join us next week as we introduce Raphael Makuzi. He has done social justice work in Africa and is now looking towards a model of social justice that he thinks helps sustain social change in communities. And he'll take a look at how we might move to a kind of economic justice that pushes us beyond the idea of capitalism, socialism, or even the welfare state. So join us next week for Soul Forum as we welcome Raphael and his series on seeking economic justice.